dedicate people. I've done training with our own S2 Tech and Xerox. So that's the training I want to share with you. What we're going to cover today is the CQ application, and that is Rational ClearQuest, and we use that for defect tracking. So that we have process and procedures that have been written around the tool. So I want to walk through a little bit of what CQ is, how we use CQ for defect tracking, and then I'll also show you CQ, and I'll show you some of the training site, just to make sure that I'm not sharing information I'm not allowed to share. But let's get going. So today we're going to look at defect management, the fundamentals, best practices. We're going to talk about defect management workflow, the purpose of it, what the actions, status, and states are, the roles and responsibilities of our team members with defect management. We'll look at CQ, and then we do have reference materials for the project. I'll do a little demo, and then, we can, I'll answer any questions you have. And please don't hesitate to stop me and ask a question. So defect management, the defect management procedure that we wrote for Mississippi is a defect tracking approach based around continuous learning and continual improvement. The fundamentals of effective defect tracking are the same whether you're using a pencil, a piece of paper, a spreadsheet, or a full-fledged tracking tool. So implementation of the fundamentals provides a solid foundation for success. Information capture. Within the defect management procedure, I've provided guidelines to establish the minimum amount of information needed to report a defect. So for example, what information is needed on the defect title, the descriptions, and the various fields on the defect record that we use. Reproduction. To verify that a defect has been fixed, a user must first be able to reproduce it. Prioritize and schedule. After a defect is found, it must be prioritized and scheduled to be fixed, and this is determined by the priority and severity of a problem. And then communication, of course, it's an open line of communication back and forth between the tester, the development team, and the functional team as well. It opens up a dialogue between who reported the defect and who's responsible for moving the defect through the defect life cycle. Beyond the fundamentals of the defect tracking are best practices. Best practices are implemented to maximize overall development and quality assurance. The idea behind these best practices is that with proper processes and checks and testing, defect management can be rolled out and completed with fewer complications. A unified defect tracking approach. There's much to be gained by adopting a unified approach to defect tracking. Developers and testers need to follow a similar tracking methodology and the use of the tool to make sure that the proper steps are taken to resolve any issues. Keep it simple. Simplicity is often overlooked when implementing a defect tracking tool, so I want to make it easy for everyone to report defects and follow the process of tracking the defects by utilizing concepts like the workflow definition. The ClearQuest has many features that can be overwhelming to utilize, so by creating a defect management procedure, this steps you through how the process is implemented, the steps that need to be taken. So we have documentation to help you out. And then use relevant terminology. So defect tracking tools should be simple and intuitive. If users add defects and see fields that are unclear or that they do not understand, then the defect will lack essential data. And we have a field guidance that will help you out on how to populate the defects, along with a whole team that will be able to help you out. Report or capture report data. We are generally use dashboards to capture the report data, and this is we export it to Excel. That's the tool that we use to do our reporting for the state and for our client as well. And then reproducible defects. It's vital to collect relevant, useful information because the benefits of the tool is only as good as the information you put into it. So if you enter in incorrect or incomplete information, development and the QA team will waste time tracking down the defects based on bad information, or to have constantly requesting clarification of about a poorly documented problem. And the last best practice I'd like to emphasize is avoid defect duplication. So one defect is very helpful. 10 reports about the same defect can be time-consuming to correct. So therefore, prior to submitting new defects, we're very conscious of what defect has been documented in the tool. Are there any questions yet? No. Okay. The purpose of defect management, the purpose of the defect tracking workflow is to move issues from initial reporting to resolution. The defect process for submitting defects is divided into different activities performed by our quality analysts, which are our testers, our business analysts, and our developers. And each of these activities go through a different combination of states and statuses and ownership. So I'll show you in the tool how things are assigned and how we can follow it through. Based on the action taken during each defect state, the state of a defect is changed. So for the defect record entry, typically that is a quality analyst who enters in the defect. They're doing their testing, so they'll enter in the defect. Once the defect's been entered into the system, we have on our QA team, we've got subject matter experts and we've got business analysts, and that's the first step that it's been entered, and it's our senior testers or quality assurance needs that reviews the defect to make sure that it is a valid defect. That, you know, maybe a tester or the state thinks that the program should be working a certain way, but it's really not in the design. So they make sure that it's a valid defect. And then defect remediation. If our QA team has any questions that they can't resolve, they'll reach out to the functional business analyst in needs to help them look at the defect and determine if it is a true defect. The defect's reviewed by the development lead. So the development lead will review and assign to the appropriate developer. So once it's been determined to be a valid defect and we assign it to the development team, the development lead will assign it to a tester. And then when we validate that the defect has been fixed and it's been deployed, the test lead will assign it back to the tester to have it retested and closed. And this is just some of the documentation. This is where when I wrote the defect management procedure, we keep it out on the project, their documentation site. So some people keep it in SharePoint, other projects keep it on a shared drive, and this is just part of, I was identifying where they're going to store it. What the slide 8 is talking about is this is the workflow of a defect, and that established process that a defect must follow, thus ensuring that no defects are missed while providing tracking and accountability through the defect management life cycle. So we'll talk about that, but it's in a submitted state that's owned by the tester. It goes to open, that's owned by our QA team. It goes to assigned, that goes to development. When it's fixed in development and it's resolved, we have to wait till it's released into the test environment, and then it's retested by our team. And on this slide, it's just talking about what I just talked about. You know, who owns it, what's the next state. So those are the various states: submitted, open, assigned, resolved, retested, and closed. Any questions?
Hi, I'm Manjini. I have a question. Who owns that submitted part of that defect? Who owns that?
Say that again. What part of the defect?
Submit first one submitted. The state.
That's owned by the. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's owned by the testing team. So that's that when you're testing and you submit this, you own it, and it's just really overnight. You'll submit it one day. By the next day, we have the QA business analyst. They'll put it in an open state, and that means they own it. And there's a little diagram that I can show you as well that will help you when you submit it, where it's at in the defect flow and who owns it. That was a good question.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? So what I listed here under roles and responsibilities as it relates to defect management is a quality analyst. They identify and report on the defects. They re-execute the test script when it's released into the test environment. And we have triage calls every day, defect triage calls. We also have defect review board meetings, and that's with our management. That's usually the project management. So for us right now, that's Xerox. And we may ask you to join the call to understand exactly the defects. So as you're going through your testing and your script, we may ask you, can you explain what happened, why you think it's a defect? And that's the first level. Then we have our functional SMEs, our QA SME, and the QA leads. They provide support to the test analysts, and they validate that the defects that are reported are valid. They create change requests, and they update system documentation. So if you enter in a defect, and it's really the way that the system functions, the state may choose to create a change request that they want it to function a different way. So our QA team will help write some of those CRs. They assign the defects to development, and they also attend the calls when needed. And then we have our development lead, and he verifies, assigns it to a developer, and attends calls. And we have a defect manager on the account. That's Courtney Jarrett. Courtney, she will, some of this is in the beginning stages of the project, but Courtney creates the dashboard metrics, and I can show you what those look like, and she attends the calls. And those are the roles and responsibilities of the team. For the test manager, we have weekly management meetings, and I'll review the metrics with our Xerox team. All the test results are delivered to Xerox and to the state, and there's different activities. So I'll coordinate and schedule some of the retests. I give status reports every day, and I help with the Department of Medicaid retesting activities for DOM, and help with some of our staffing assignments. And then we have DOM, that's our client, and they review the dashboard that we provide, and they also review defects in the tool. They have access to the tool as well. So the tool that we use for defect management is Rational ClearQuest. And the application is a lifecycle management tool, software that provides flexible change and defect tracking. It's customizable. It's designed to be used with other testing tools. We have, on this account, we are using Rational Quality Manager. That's where we're doing our execution, and that's where we're housing our test cases. Rational Functional Tester is what the automation team is using. And I'll see if we can get a demo on that when you join the team. So the next few slides is actually screenshots for DOM. It helps them log in, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a demo at this point. But before we move on, are there any questions? Okay. I'm going to launch. Yes, go ahead, please.
Excuse me, ma'am. I have a question. I am Anu. So the automation is done using RQM?
It's using, automation does use RQM, but that's for manual testing, basically, but they do have some things in it. Rational Functional Tester is the application they use for automation.
Okay. Ma'am, also I have a question. Using the dashboard, how we create a report? Is it in the form of graph or?
It could be. On one of the accounts that I was on, we did use graphs, but let me bring up an example of one of the reports that we're doing for Mississippi. So this is actually, let me get down there, test case report. This is something that I exported out of RQM. So here's what we do is I'm using pivot tables instead of charts, but you can see this is what I'll give to our management. So this is the execution status by each functional area. In the functional areas in MS ABD is consolidation, conversion, interfaces, invoices, letters, notices, reports, and business rules. And you can see how many test cases we have as a grand total, and then what's passed and what's failed, and what's been not executed. So we're 3/4 of the way through, and the last part is, we're in the sprint. And there's other things that we can, other items that I report on creating from the pivot table. But this actually, this tab down here is Test Execution Record tab. This is the data being pulled from RQM. Now tomorrow we have, we'll go over RQM and we'll talk about that. But the same thing for defect tracking. We can export out of CQ. Let me log into CQ and show you. We can do reporting from CQ and create pivot tables or charts. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you. No. Okay, I'm going to log in. This is the web version of CQ, and I'm going to log into this. And I'm going to go into the production database. And you can see we have various databases. Xerox shares databases across all projects. So ours is, you can see up here, I think Molly might be in the way here. This is Mississippi MED project, and I'm logged in. So I'm going to walk through the flow of a defect for you. I think, do you have anything? I'm going to walk through on the fields when you submit a defect, but I'm not going to save the record. So your testing, there's two ways you can enter in a defect. We are using Rational Quality Manager, and so in the execution of a test case, we can create a defect and tie it to the test case. What I'm showing you here is a web version of CQ, and I'm just going to create a new defect. So I'll select defect. These are the fields that we set up for this project. So when you open a defect, it defaults to a defect ID, and the state is submitted. And it gives the date and who's submitting it. Anything that you see in red is a required field. Anything that you don't see in red may or may not be populated based on the project. Again, because we share this database across all projects, there's fields that we may use or certain values that we will use. And in the documentation, the procedure document, I'll walk you through and say this is what we use in Mississippi. So for example, the title, if you had a entry UI, and please excuse my typing, the entry user interface is missing a field. So it would be missing, and depending on the project you're on, so let's say it's missing a family member field. So this is just a high level of what the defect is. The severity in the procedure document, we have the various severities. This has been provided to us by the Department of Medicaid. An S1 blocker, that's it. If you put it's an S1 blocker, that means nothing can be done. The system is halted. This has to be corrected immediately. But these are the values for severity, and you'll choose one according to what the defect is, and we give you ideas as to how to identify the values you need to use. We have a priority field, and it's high, medium, or low. The project will default to our Mississippi ABD. The life cycle phase is the testing phase. So these are the values for MSABD. We had a targeted baseline testing, system integration testing, end-to-end testing, user acceptance testing, regression testing, and then DOM has their own testing. So we're in system integration testing right now. And then we have build. And Anil is our development manager, our DDI manager, and he provides us every time that they do a build, he provides us with the number so we can trace back that this defect is actually associated to this certain build. And ours, I'll start out with MSABD. And these are the builds that we have so far. It's up to 11.0.8. So we are using this. We also use this in our test case execution as well. So we can test the two together. But you'll select the build that you're testing. The iteration is if we're testing in a sprint, and system testing is either sprint 1 or sprint 2. So you'll select the appropriate choice. And here's the action status. The combination of date and action status defines who owns it. So as a tester, the first thing is it's in a submitted state, so this will have review required. And when you say that, that means that the defect has been submitted by testing, and it's now up to our QA SME to validate it. So I can run reports, and I'll show you that in a second. I can run reports and say, here's the values that we do have and who owns it. Also be assigned to, that's your login information. And just for example, I'll just put mine on there. Defect categorization, got a lot of values to choose from. So it could be a GUI presentation, it could be an interface, it could be reports, letters, notices, and we've got a whole list that you'll choose the correct value for what the categorization is. Now, if we choose assign to, and I chose my name, when I save this, it will populate to Mary Jo Anderson. And then the defect type is another field that we use, and it's got three values. Either it's ad hoc test, which it doesn't have a test case. There's something wrong with the system documentation, or we found this defect in functional testing. And then the test case ID we don't normally do because in RQM, when we do create defects, and that's how our team's going to do this, it will associate it for us. So we can run reports when they deploy the new code, and we'll run reports and say, you have this defect to validate, and it's associated to these three test cases. So it's a wonderful tool that you don't have a lot of manual lookup. And we'll go through all of that when we go through RQM. And then we have to give a description, reproduction steps, and the functional area or the functional component that owns it. So again, it could be any one, if you're testing for consolidation, that's your functional area. And the functional subcomponents, we have, in this case, they're all COEs for ABD. I'm not going to save this. The other values, we'll talk through this as well. I'm not going to save it. I'm just going to bring up one that we already have because this is our production database, so I don't want to add a bogus defect. But the defects, I'm going to cancel out of here, and we're going to look at anything that is in, so a submitted state, we don't have anything that's in a submitted state. They've moved on today. In an open state, we're doing really good, actually. So open means that the QA, DA has looked at it. We don't have anything. They moved it on. We should have things in assigned. The assigned state, as you can see, it just brings up, this is just a query that I wrote, so I can track what test cases we have in development. Now, we have 15 of them in development. And actually, this one is really not correct because there's only two states and statuses. It's either that we're waiting for the development lead to look at it, or he's assigned it to someone. When it's resolved, it'll go that we're waiting for pending release. But this is how we can track where a defect is and who owns it, just by the state and status. Anything in assigned state is development, and then we do have also, we have the assigned field, and that's really the assigned to is the owner. So these are all the people that own defects. So the life cycle of a defect, as you can see on my queries here, it goes, it's following our defect management procedure. So I can tell where it's at, who owns it, and when we can test it again. Do you have any questions? Has anyone used CQ before? This is new. So, well, let me show you. It seems like a lot of information, but once you start working into the tool and creating defects and joining the defect calls, there really is a rhythm to it and a flow, like I said, the workflow that you'll understand when we start looking at first, how we are identifying, let me open up just one of these defects. Now, the development team, depending on the priority and severity, that's how they're assigning these defects out. On this project, we don't have the number of defects that you would have in an MMIS project, so we can stay on top of it. But these two fields, priority and severity, is how development determines which ones need to be fixed first. Well, that's the tool for ClearQuest. If you don't have any other questions, there's something that you would see how we export into creating reports.
Mary Jo, I'll get a question going for us here.
Okay.
So with the ClearQuest tool, what happens is the tester is going through the test environment and going through mock cases and those such things, like Swathi walked us through with the user interface the past couple of days. And so if a error is identified, then this information gets inserted into this. And all of this information is captured in here. But is there any, does the development team have direct access to this, or is it exported to a different technology?
No, every team on Mississippi has access to it. So this is the tool that we use to track it. Testing enters in the defect, and the development team, every day we have a triage call to talk about the defects that have been entered. But the development team, Anil and his team, they come out to CQ every day and look at the defects, look at the new ones that have been entered, and then we'll report on the ones that are in on their plate or within their team. So anything that development owns, we walk through every day. How's it going? When do you think this one will be fixed? Is it going to be in deployment? For example, we have a deployment tomorrow. And so once they deploy to the environment, the fixes for defects, then we do smoke testing, and that's automated. And then we'll start re-executing the test cases associated to the defects. So everybody has access to this tool, and this is what we will enter it, follow it, and close it within CQ.
Okay.
I have a question here.
Yes, go ahead.
In the description field here, what we need to write it in the description? Is it the detailed description of that defect? Step by step, we have to.
Yeah, the ones that I'm showing you here, we were in our sprint, so we were working with DOM, and DOM really didn't follow the process as closely as our team does, but the description is, what's really happening. So this is countable income displays issues is the title, and the description field gives you what kind of issues is it displaying. So it's showing on the decision details, and the earned income is not showing at all. Now the reproduction step, the way that our testing team will document this, and there's also, we have templates that you have to fill out as well with screenshots, but reproduction steps are, number 1, I logged in. Number 2, I did this. Number 3, I got this error. And that just helps the development team to follow through where exactly an error happened or where you think the defect is occurring, what's not showing. So the description elaborates on the title, and the reproduction steps indicate the steps that you took when you got the defect. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It is clear now.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Mary Jo, you mentioned that how ClearQuest is something that's customizable, which means that it's used in a variety of environments. And so specific to Mississippi ABD, if someone who has had prior experience with ClearQuest, would this potentially look completely different, or is it just the fields that are different and the process flow is always the same?
They're both different. The ClearQuest application itself, it has these tabs. The main tab, contact information, what other defects is this associated to, or CRs, and it's got the various tabs as you can see across the top. What's been customized is when I set up ClearQuest, these are the fields that I chose. I wanted it to have a title, the priority and severity, the life cycle phase, wanted to know those values in the life cycle phase. So it would be our phases of testing for the project. And different projects have testing phases, they name them differently. It could be functional testing in one, system testing, we call it system integration testing. So when it says it's customizable, I chose the fields that I wanted to see and the values that I wanted each to have.
Okay. And
I have one more question.
Yes, please go ahead.
So the defect ID and the test case ID, those are the different, those both relate to the same test case, right? So those are the different defect ID and test.
Yes. I can run a report. Now this one they enter, this is a free form field, and this is what they're just tracking the print side. But let me look at a closed defect. Okay, so this is the one that one of our teams did, and you could see, well, they did add a test case ID. This is an RQM ID, but I can run here. It will associate the way RQM works is when you create a defect, it will open up, in RQM, it will open up the CQ application, and we'll be able to track defects. So for example, under defects, I can tell you which one's associated to these test cases. And see, we've got, this one is in a pass status, but this actually failed before and they associated it to a defect. So I don't know if I answered your question as to, let me go back to the tool. The defect ID is associated to the test case when we have a defect.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
A little bit, not much clear actually. What I understood is when we take again the defect, then the defect ID will come into the picture. Through that we can. Okay.
Yes, these 4 fields across the top are system generated, so you don't have to pass those. Yeah, so when I open a new defect,
Mm-hmm.
There's the new defect ID.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
And Mary Jo, I think something that relates to that follow-up question, when there is a defect, you had mentioned in the presentation about the efforts to not have duplicate defects. So how does one find what specifically relates to that? Does that happen in the meetings or reports that are distributed that are read through? How does that get, if you find a defect, how do you know that it's not a duplicate?
Well, everyone has access to this tool. So the first thing that the team's going to do is look at, before they start execution, they should look at all the defects. So if we chose, and when you're on the project, we're talking through them, so they'll sound familiar to you. But what you can do is, I think I have it in the public query. MS. So these are closed and open defects. So we had 208 just by the title. And you can export this. So let's say you're working on long-term care, you're executing those. You can export this to a spreadsheet, or you could do a search on long-term care and see if there's any open defects. And that's how you would check for duplicates.
Okay.
So that's up to the tester to know what defects have already been reported.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question here regarding to this. So how often do we need to check up the already defects are there before going for the test case, writing the test case? We have to see all this already which are in the list in the defects. So how often we have to use this one?
You would have to use it every day. Yeah, so you would be assigned an area, a functional area. And so let's say you're testing business rules and you're testing a specific business rule. We have the names of the business rules in the title of a defect, so you could do a search on that specific business rule to see, are there any open defects or identified defects? So like I said, it could be a long-term care. It could be, this one case has no transferred resource penalty, but the stop payment indicator is yes. So if you're assessing transferred resources, you'll be able to look at the defect. Then you know that there are defects out there for that specific functional component. And then when you start your testing, you're going to say, oh, I got the same thing. And you'll come out here and you'll say that there's already a defect. And we have a process that your test case will then be marked as failed, and it will be associated to a defect that's already been entered. And I can show you how to do that in RQM tomorrow, but we've got processes in place to help you, and we'll walk through all of that with you to make sure, here's the tool. What I just showed you is the functionality of the tool, but I did not show you the processes that I wrote behind the tool, that this is going to be our methodology and how we're going to use it. And those things are in place to help you out.
Mary Jo, forgive my ignorance if it's an obvious answer here, but you had mentioned previously about the meeting when it goes to the development group, and I think you called it a triage meeting. Was just curious what that terminology meant.
Okay. Triaging is when there's a question. So they'll get the tester, they'll get the QA, BA, and they'll get the development team on a call, and they'll talk about the defect. Now, every day, for example, I did the defect management call this morning, and I created a report, and let me bring that up for you. So this morning, what we did was I exported out of the tool, here's all our open defects. And then everyone calls in. We've got Xerox management. We've got everybody on the QA team, the development team, the functional team, and we walk through, each of the defects. So right now we have a grand total of 53, but out of the 53, 30 of them goes back to DOM. So what I did was, when I created the pivot table, we have one in functional C review required. That means that this isn't in development yet. So this is one that we looked at. So that's, when we talk about triage calls, there's reports that's being created. The defect manager we have daily meetings on our calendar, and everyone will call in, and we'll walk through each of these defects as to, okay, we've got one that's ready for QA test. Where's it at? Is it assigned to someone? So I can bring this as a defect that we're talking about. So what I'll do is I'll ask the owner of this defect where we're at. So, for example, this is ready to be retested, and it's assigned to Swati. But Swati is the lead, and she actually does assign this out to one of her testers. So she's probably looking at it or waiting for smoke test to happen. But that's, we'll say, Swati, it's ready to be tested, but it's assigned to you, and really it should be assigned to a tester. So when we talk triage, that just means that we're all on a call together and we're following each of these defects, what's going on with it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Regarding the iteration sprint 1, is it the sprint 1, is it in the agile methodology? That is why it is the sprint 1?
No, the way it works is our phases of testing, we have for system integration, for sprint 1, that meant that we chose so many test cases for each area. And then I think we had maybe 50 or 60 test cases that we took to DOM and went through testing. So the iteration that we chose, Sprint 1, just means that this was part of the functionality that we delivered to the Department of Medicaid for their testers to start looking at it to see, are they, is this what they're expecting? This is what the system looks like. This is what you agree to. You see anything wrong with it. So that's what, when we say the iteration was Sprint 1, that just identified the functionality in test cases that we delivered to them. Now, in Sprint 1, there was 2 sessions going on. And when it has this DOM lab, what that means is there was 2 rooms. One was DOM that had 2 people that were testing what we tested. And then there was another room that they had brought in about 20 field eligibility workers just to start testing. So we really had to, look at what we want to test for Sprint 1, and that's why we called it iteration.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We have, for this account, we have 2 sprints. The next Sprint 2 is in December. So we'll be going through that second sprint, going back down to Mississippi and sitting with DOM and their IV&D vendor and let them do the testing. We'll test everything first, but they'll write their own test cases, and then they'll also use some of our test cases. Now, for MMIS, they could have 20, 30 sprints. You know, that's much bigger, but Mississippi just has 2 for right now. Anything else you can think of? Molly, do you have any questions?
That was all of the initial ones that I could think of.
Okay.
Everyone else on the call, please don't think that any question is silly, as being the time right now is a great time to ask any question, regardless of if you think it seems like you already should know it or not. We're all in the learning stage here, so we've got a great resource to ask. So please speak up if you do have any questions.
Right. I mean, just for the small amount of time I went through this, I know there's probably just a lot of questions in your head. And you can, email me. Don't hesitate. Just email me. You can email me at maryjoa@s2tech.com, and I'll reply back to you. If you want to go through another review of this, we can do that. And then when we onboard, we've got the documentation I can share with you. I'll just show you, so for our defect management procedure, the last one that I wrote was, I think it's the 7.0. And then Courtney is now the defect manager, and she may have some updates. But you could see that this document is 39 pages, more than 39 pages. So it's a huge document, but it will walk you through, it's actually 50 pages. But what I did was I created the document so that it will walk you through. If we go to defect record entry, I'll tell you, here's how you submit a defect, where what you need to click on. It'll give you screenshots. It'll tell you what needs to be filled in. These are all system generated, like we just talked about. And then when we talked about title and severity, I give you examples, but then there's a field guidance section. So if you go down to the bottom of the procedure, it will walk you through, here, let me show you the field guidance. It will walk you through, for example, priority. I give you a description, I'll give you an example, and then what that valid value is. So not only will you have a team that will help you, you also have the procedure document that walks you through it every step of the way. And someone earlier asked ownership. I do have a table in here. When it's in a submitted state and it's action review required, it's owned by the testing team. And then the open state, it's depending on what value it is, who owns it. So we do have tables in here that will help you out as well. But that's just an example of just one of the procedures that we do have on this project. It's got a lot of documentation that can help you.
Mary Jo, you mentioned when you're making assignments or when you are testing the system, you're assigned different areas. Is it typical for just one person per area, or are there multiple people that you're working with, a team of people who are testing the same area?
The way it works is, for example, we have Swati, she is the lead over conversion and consolidation. And then we have our offshore testers that are assigned, there may be 2 or 3 assigned to floppy. So they're always testing the one functional area. They become very accustomed to testing the UIs to understand what they should look like, what the values are, same for rules. So people are assigned to an area so that not every day you've been giving a whole new area, whole new functionality that you have to figure out. So for, what we're looking at now is the new CRs coming in. You'll be assigned to work with a lead and a team that will be testing a particular change request.
Okay. So this document that you just showed us, Mary Jo, that walks you through all those different fields and everything. So it would also, like the categories of defect, categorization. I know there were a lot of options in that category. So there's some additional guidance there, or are those options fairly straightforward?
They are fairly straightforward. Let me get you down to the, so that particular field, that would be defect categorization. So, for business rules, batch process, I give you what to help you figure out, is it a command problem? And, if it's converted data, or if you're entering in the data itself. But I give you a description of each of those in this documentation.
Mary Jo, again, might be a basic question here, but I'll ask it anyway. With the, when we are identifying these defects, and there are test cases that get identified for which test cases we were going to be testing and all those types of things, where do those test cases originate from?
Those are in RQM. Rational Quality Manager, and that's the other tool that we use.
Okay. Anybody have any?
That's tomorrow, isn't it? Do we have a meeting tomorrow to talk about that?
It is next Thursday.
Okay, sorry, next Thursday.
Yep.
I need to get that on my calendar, Molly.
Okay, let me see. Make sure it's on mine. Yeah. Let's see.
Tomorrow.
Oh, you know what? That's because I didn't copy it over to that. So
okay,
I will do that and send it out to everybody.
Okay, good.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Any other questions for Mary Jo?
I have a question. What is CQ refer to?
For CQ?
Yes.
ClearQuest.
Okay.
That's from ClearQuest. Yeah. The tools that they're using on this project, they're I like the tools. They use the Rational tool suite. Very easy to use. You'll like it as well.
Like the sound of that. Okay, and I sent the updated invite. It was on the listing that you all were sent, but it wasn't on the actual calendar. So fix that now.
Okay, thank you, Molly.
Welcome. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how about the other tabs here beside the main contact information, associated defect modes? Those all we are using daily for that contact information, test logs, and all other tabs for the giant test.
What we're using on this project is, I can walk through these. The contact information, you should see we don't have anything here. Now, the way CQ is, if you change, you have to set up your properties. So my user profile, if I click on that, I had to enter in my email address and my phone number. So the way that I set this up is anytime the assigned to changes to your name, if you are the owner, you're going to get an email. So when Flossy changes it to me, for example, as a tester, she'll switch that to Mary Jo Anderson. I'll get an email from the server telling me that this defect, I now own the defect. So the contact information is if you want to, you're a lead or you're a tester and you just want to know, when it's changing, the date of it has changed or the assigned to has changed, you can add your information here. So if I want to modify this particular one, I can say, add my name, and every time this defect changes, I'll get an email. So that's what the contact information means. I'm going to cancel out of there because I don't want an email from them. So for the associated defects and CRs, what this means is there may be a defect that is fixed but cannot be tested because it's dependent on another defect to be fixed. So either this particular defect is a child of another defect or it's a parent. And so when we do have that happening, that it's associated to another defect, sometimes when we duplicate defects, we're saying, that this is what it's associated to. CRs, we don't, on this project, they don't use CQ for change requests. They use SharePoint. So this isn't something we use, but that's what the associated defects in CR tab is. Notes we use all the time. Now this one we didn't, but this is where a functional SME or a development person is talking back and forth with someone. They're adding their note. And then requirements, we don't link requirements to defects. We link requirements to test cases. So we're not using this tab on the project. The resolution tab and verification tab, when it changes from, I believe it's from assigned to resolved, then when we change it from resolved to that we retested it, when you change the state of a defect, these two tabs will be highlighted depending on what state you're changing to. So if you're changing it to closed, you have to fill this out. So as you can see, the resolution, HEMA said that, this has been fixed. She's closed it. The expressions document is updated, and the date completed was the 19th. So this is a closed defect. And then attachments, when we enter in, how old is this one? October 14th. But see, this is DOM. For our attachments, I'll bring up what we use for attachments. When we're documenting our test cases, we have what we call a test case expected results attachment template. And this is just, it gives you the instructions on how to fill it in. But we have this table that you're going to add, what the test case, the status is. If it's passed or failed, and if it's failed, you're going to attach it to the defect. If it's passed, you're going to attach it to the test case. But anyways, then you're going to add your defect ID and the description. If it's a defect, what environment you're testing it at, what's the URL, the release number of your build, the date you executed it, your user ID and password, and then the steps taken, the repeatable steps. So this is just the template itself, but it tells you step one, and you get this from your test cases, so you could just copy and paste. We have step one and what data and the identifiers and expected results. I can bring up a test case to show you that. And then you put your screen prints in. So that's going back to CQ, that's where you're going to add your attachment. So you'll always, for defect, have an attachment. So the development will be able to see what you did. History, this is populated, system generated. So anytime this defect was modified, it tells you the time and date and who entered it. So Neil and Hema were working on it. Courtney is the defect manager, so she changed. It went from this one modified new state to old state. So this is just, what the states are, but the audit trail tells you more than that. So for Courtney, the action, she changed it to retest, and it's the final state of retested. It wasn't resolved, so you can go through the audit and see what was going on. So between history and audit, we'll be able to tell who's updating what. Unified change management, we're not using that on this project. Test logs, we're not putting that here either. We keep that in RQM. The environment, that's on our test case. Execution records, that's in RQM, so we're not using that. We're not using this one or the links as well. So really on this project, it's sometimes the associated defects and CRs, the notes, resolution, verification, attachments, and then your audit, your audit trail and history. And that's all documented in the procedure document as well on, what we're using. So you won't have trouble trying to figure that out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Okay, well, feel free to send me an email if you think of anything that you didn't have.
Yep.
It was nice working with you today.
Thank you.
Okay, Molly.
Thanks, Mary Jo, so much for sharing your expertise and giving us a glimpse into this system. I will follow up today's session with an email and also include Mary Jo's email in case you do end up having specific questions about what we've gone over today as well. I know it was a lot to go over, but it certainly does look like there's a lot of supportive documentation and guidance in place. So that's all good stuff. Okay, so that will take care of it for today. Just a reminder of what is on the training schedule.